Alrighty, same day for me, another day for you, and another chapter for everyone. Chapters for you, chapters for you. Hey, dog, says chapter for you too. Well, maybe not for you, but you're a good boy, so you might get two. Who knows? Anyways, yep, YouTube conf, blah, 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 yaggity schmack. Check out the pinned comment, I'll have some extra details if you're interested. To the podcast, to merch, all that other stuff. Just a quick shout out to the T5 peeps. Bob the Dragon, Cat Crab Lobster, Data Magnet, Dark Machine, Bezic, Try Again 95, Fudic Yol, Astrea the Dreamer, Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Ithilia, Meridian 117, and Jordan Bucksmorm. Thank you very much. Alrighty, on to the story. Born to Kill, Chapter 9. Harkin was now staring at an assembly of Klaxian warriors blanketed in a dust storm kicked up from the departing dropship thrusters. She saw almost the entire dropship scattered along the forming front line. She could actually feel the pings of the tiny rocks hitting the back of her helmet and hear the tapping sound as they bounced off. She must have been almost 2 meters tall to be able to see all these Klaxian. The closest ones couldn't bend their heads far enough to meet her gaze. Some sort of communication device drowned out the dust storm. Anyone else getting nervous when they stare at us like this? Laughter. A female voice cut in. Look at you three, the most eligible bachelors on whatever the feck rock with 20,000 lonely ladies. Wave at all the pretty girls, Patel. The tutor was still augmenting the simulation. Moldy was an Australian. Patel loved her like an older sibling. Harkin was getting sucked into the bottomless pit of tutor's attempts to explain questions as they formed. 20,000? I thought you said not if I was the last man on Earth, Specialist Moldy. How about a moon? More laughter. This time, 3 voices and Harkin's avatar in unison. Harkin figured it out. She was Patel. She could experience everything that she had in some sort of recording. She tried to tell Bay and found that she couldn't even feel her own mandibles. Only what must have been at least 30 rock-like crushes. Terrans were not warm. They were burning from the inside. She could feel the heat pushing back against the cold of her armor. His internal frame was driving the crushing weight of himself and his armor into the hardened dust below. She could actually feel the compacted dust cracking with each step, while the Klaxians seemed to be dancing on the surface. A much older voice came in. It was their patriarch, a 64-year-old grandfather they called Gramps. Harkin now understood that they had no drones. This male, who Patel trusted implicitly, was a father of a father. If such a thing existed in the Empire, he would look like a queen of another queen. Harkin felt the responsibility Patel had for him. Age had slowed him, and he shouldn't have been here. Patel would see that nothing harmed him. Okay, kiddos, back to work. Split it up as we talked about. When we get to the green light, get in range and wiggle the bachelor asses for the ladies. You too, Moldy, we don't judge here. We want them shooting at us and not our little friends here. I'll give you a shiny star for each overload that you can bait out of them. Take your shots, nice and slow, but bring the ruckus. Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to feck with. The tutor didn't attempt whatever that was. Laughter from the 4 of them again, and all of a sudden Harkin was moving, literally flying across the field. Most of Patel's energy was being spent trying to not crash into the Klaxian, who offered a feeding gesture to Patel as he flew past them. They had timed that maneuver perfectly, and the battle had started right when Patel got to the outermost edge of his grid. Small wonder Harkin's Legion spotter hadn't adapted in time. The Terrans had given them none. When Patel's HUD lit up, she could see that he had a full view of every legionary in front of him. He didn't take cover, as there was nothing on this moon that could shield his massive silhouette. Lights burst along the lines as he took a volley of fire. Most missed as he was charging them in an angled jump. The few that landed merely disappeared into the steel plates. The Legat, riding along inside his mind, knew that all of these streaks of light should have been hitting the advancing Klaxian. This single action alone was upsetting the carefully choreographed dance perfected in her Empire's war rooms. Her Legion had lost. It just didn't know it yet. Mid-air, he lined up a shot with his HUD, apparently linked to the sights of his weapon, and Harkin felt the recoil at his bones. This simulation was too fast for Harkin, but she knew whatever he had been aiming at was gone. She had seen what a failed energy shield did to a legionary that had trusted it. Any notion that Patel was just a simple distraction disappeared along with the poor sister. Falling from an almost 16-meter apex, Patel was actually frustrated with the time it was taking to come down. Harkin could now understand that all these Terrans seemed to have frightening reflexes. They were accustomed to falling into a ludicrous gravity of their own nuclear hell of a world. Everything that came next was just a blur of movement and gore, with the occasional flash of an overloading pulse rifle. Harkin was mentally begging him to not load another magazine, and had to watch through his eyes each time another 30 explosions tore through her sisters. 7 minutes it had taken Patel to fire his weapon to depletion. He had been calm in his aim and indifferent to the returning fire. If anything, he seemed to revel in it and chose to focus his fire on the legionary that had a good sense to fire at the Klaxians Patel had been deliberately covering. A steady stream of communication then came in as all 4 of his unit reported that they were empty. Gramps spoke up and they all formed around Kratos to kneel. "Okay, kiddos, I'm all out of stickers for you. I think we did our job for today. Keep up at the front, but don't extend. I know what happened with those SDKG-48 clowns, but we don't do that here. Got it? Got it. Patel, something weird is going on in your grid. It looks like they've held the Legion in reserve and are trying to re-establish that bow shape that they started with. I want you to move back a couple of 100 meters till we figure out what's going on here." Patel jumped straight up like a coiled spring and took a full look at the situation from 20 meters above the battle. Harkin could see her own 10th Legion charging. "Gramps, my little lady friends are not going to be able to fall back in time." "That wasn't a request, Patel. Move that tushy back. They know how to handle themselves." Patel looked below himself as he came down and saw at least a dozen Klaxian in his own crater trying to hold the room. He had jumped far too high, and it was taking precious time to come back down. Worse, vast near-vacuum winds combined with the moon's rotation were causing him to drift in his launching point. A legionary must have gotten into the flank at some point and was lining up its rifle, totally oblivious to Patel's coming down like a comet. Some cruel fate had caused Patel's shadow to alert her sister, who had only enough time to look up. Harkin wanted to scream for the legionary to run, but it was far too late. She felt Patel's fist drive the legionary into the ground, then through the dust layer, and finally his armored hand went through both sides of her exoskeleton. She would have died instantly. That was the only mercy now. Patel hadn't done anything like that in his short life. She felt his disgust with himself as his arm shot back into his side. To his horror, the limp body came firmly attached to his elbow. In a panic to free himself, he used his other forearm to shear the corpse off. The Klaxian beside him had turned around to see what impact had shaken the crater and totally froze in the shadow of this brutality. Patel screamed at the Klaxian to run, but he wasn't in the same channel, and the near vacuum wouldn't have carried even that sense-shattering roar. Harkin thought the hatchling had been loud, but this was different. Light blackened Patel's vision as another legionary came over the ridge and overloaded a shot straight into the side of Patel's knee. His awkward crouch had put his plating apart, and the shot slipped through into and under his armor. Patel's world went white, and then Harkin felt his pain. Her own limbs grew back, and there was a limit to how much pain was useful to her. Once that limit had been reached, there was no need to go on. Her body was merciful, while Patel's was not. Anger, fear, rage, and pain. She had felt Patel's mind, and now she felt it vanish. There was no more Patel. The legionary that had fired on him was now floating backwards with Patel's empty weapon lodged in its thorax. Several more legionaries came over the room and, shocked by the sight of Patel next to their desecrated sister, began to fire on him. Harkin didn't know where the front line was because neither did Patel. The HUD may as well have been off because he seemed to look through it in an effort to fixate on his attackers. Harkin may not have been able to close her first eyelids, but her mind seemed to shelter her from the worst of what she was seeing. Legionnaire's face frozen in horror as Patel launched himself at him, sometimes using one to bludgeon another. When Patel finally threw himself on the 10th Legionary, he didn't seem to understand what had happened. The blast had knocked him far higher than he had been jumping to this point. He came down hard this time. His knee might have been broken, but the frame of his armor kept him upright. Patel and Harkin were now deaf, and their vision was now reduced to a tunnel searching for his tormentors. He took another 2 blasts before he gave up and simply sat down. Moldy arrived first to Patel's clouding eyes. She seemed like some sort of Valkyrie hurtling down between the rays of an unnamed star. She had to drive her foot through to the ground just to slow her body down when she landed. Patel, what the feck? What the feck? Patel's down. Patel, what the feck? Gramps! Patel couldn't hear her, but the recording seemed to overlay the communication channel onto the recording for Harkin. Harkin felt Patel's mind finally creep over the pain. He looked into Moldy's face and smiled. I'm okay, it's just, the little witches with the boxes on their hips. Don't touch them, okay? Harkin was all of a sudden aware that at some point Patel had bitten a piece of his own tongue off. It was hard to believe Moldy could have made out what he said. Moldy's face went blank. The tutor simply told Harkin that she was in a null emotional state. Through Patel's fading vision, she watched Moldy pick up a Klaxion from behind and rip it in half. She then threw one half at a charging legionary, and it vanished. Patel and Harkin both faded out, and Harkin's vision came back to see Bay passed out of the table. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. There are links down below both to support this channel and for the author of this fiction. Anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.